Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast. You're listening to season 1, episode 6, hosted by me, Dani Chesson.
And me, Peter Allen.
So what are we talking about this week, Pete?
This week, Dani, we are going to talk about creativity and innovation. What's the difference?
I wonder if most people do think of those two things as different or interchangeable. So it'd be great to hear how others define those as well.
Yeah, definitely. Let's explore it. Well, maybe we do like to start with definitions now, don't we? So, who'd like to go first? Do you want to tell us yours, or shall I tell you mine? My definitions of creativity and innovation.
Go ahead, Pete.
Me? Okay. Let's see. Well, so creativity, I think, is maybe when I think of the word creativity and I talk to people in organizations about creativity, I like to help them understand or see things the way I do, which is it's much broader than what people's initial maybe learned definition of it is. Most people think of creativity, and you say creativity, most people think, oh, well, it's the arts of some sort, whether it's music or painting or sculpture or theatre, any of those, I guess, creative arts. People's definition of creativity is almost limited, and especially in a business context, people start to think of areas like design, like marketing, where people then draw things or make nice pictures, etc., etc. That's their initial definition of creativity. Mine, and I help them see and think about creativity, and imagine standing in an office building and kind of looking around you. And I like to have people do this and see everything in that space that they can see around them. That is a result of human creativity, and then start to think about the work that they do, their job, whatever it is, that it involves creativity. Now the room and the space is maybe more obvious because designers, architects have created or made a building. They've made a chair, they've made a desk, and they've taken ideas out of their mind and made them into something real that people can actually experience. In the same way that an artist would take something out of their mind and make a painting, for example. And likewise, with your somebody in finance, and sometimes I'll make a bad dad joke about creative accounting, or if you're somebody who's a developer, for example, your work involves creating because you're making something, whether it's a spreadsheet or a line of code, you are making something. So I guess I like to encourage people to think broadly and expansively about creativity, and I guess the purpose of that is to help people think and believe that creativity is part of being human, is what we do. I find that easier to kind of think about and define than innovation. But if I think about innovation, my mind starts to kind of then think about the word innovative. Is something innovative? I can't remember if I mentioned this on a podcast before, but I was, I guess, the privilege of studying Latin when I was at school, and I know therefore that innovative has its roots in the word, I think it's novus or nova, which means new, and innovative literally means making something new. So it is kind of similar to creativity, and it is making something. But when I think of innovation or something innovative, it is putting something new into the world that is maybe helpful or useful, or is making a difference in the world practically. Maybe it's, like I said, I don't have as clear an idea about that. What it isn't, though, is like my definition of innovation isn't an innovation team or department in a organization. It's kind of broader again than that. That was a very long answer. Okay. What's your definitions, Dani?
So I agree with you in terms of, creativity. Like, I feel like even when we hear the words, we imagine like an artist or paintbrushes or, I think we often tend to confuse artistic abilities with creativity. I think all humans are creative. And I often, when I talk about this, I tell people, like, if you managed to get yourself dressed this morning, that was an act of creativity. Because
Okay.
you have to kind of go, okay, what am I going to use to cover the top part of my body? What am I going to use to cover the bottom part of my body?
Okay.
And most of us exercise a bit of creativity in how we put those things together. So the way I define creativity and innovation is creativity is using our imagination to bring something into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation is when is the practical application of that thing that's been created. And when we apply that, it makes something better or moves it forward. So creativity is the act of creating, whereas innovation is the practical application of that creativity. Okay. So as an example, a painting is an act of creativity, right? It's beautiful, it's pretty to look at. Whereas, this teacup I'm drinking from today, I know our listeners can't see it, but it's beautiful.
Yes.
So, but it also has a function. It allows me to drink my tea and feel very pretty while I'm doing it.
Okay.
And so the innovation of this teacup comes from the application of it, whereas the creativity part of it is the fact that somebody created it. Okay.
So something we're similar-ish, I think, in our perspectives on this one. I'll come back to your getting dressed in the morning example, which I quite enjoy, and it helps me think about maybe degrees of creativity. And I'm imagining, there's a TV, I'm just making this up, it was like a TV program about people who dress creatively. And I would imagine that the people featured on that television program or that, TikTok channel or YouTube or anything, they're probably going to be maybe quite flamboyant in terms of how they're dressed. Versus what you're saying is actually anybody who gets themselves dressed in the morning, that is an act of creativity because you have used your imagination to identify a problem maybe, and then solve that problem in a few different ways. And, today, again, people can't see, but I'm wearing like a plaid shirt, a t-shirt, pair of trousers, cap. It's not especially flamboyant.
But you look very put together, Pete.
Thanks, Dani. Thank you. What went through my mind as you're describing that is, on the one hand, we have someone who's maybe we could say a lot of creative energy into, and has their what they're dressed in today exhibits a high degree of creativity on this particular occasion, versus me, maybe, I have been creative, but it's a lesser degree of creativity. Does that make sense, or does that kind of resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I think creativity isn't an absolute, like, it's not one of those things you either have it or you don't.
Okay.
I think creativity definitely exists on a spectrum. But I think we all sit on that creativity scale, but the degree to, where we sit on that scale is different. So, if you think of like a Picasso, where Picasso sits on that creativity scale and where I might sit on that creativity scale, we're not going to occupy the same creative space, but it doesn't mean that I'm not creative.
Okay. I like that. And Picasso is a great example. That nice. So I think we're kind of agreeing or arriving on something. So what we're saying here is creativity is not absolute. Everyone is creative. Do you think the same thing with innovation and innovative then? Do you think within every person there is the ability to innovate to a lesser degree or a greater degree?
Absolutely. I think a lot of us innovate and we don't even realize we're innovating. Another simple example, similar to the getting dressed in the morning, is, if you've ever been cooking something and, you're following a recipe, but you don't have one ingredient and your brain goes, oh, what can I substitute? That's an act of innovation.
Nice. Okay. What was the last thing? When was the last time you did that you can remember? What did you substitute in a recipe?
Well, I'm probably a terrible example of that because I don't follow recipes at all. I just read like 5 or 6 recipes and then do my own thing.
Okay. So you're probably exhibiting a high degree of creativity in the fact that you're absorbing lots of different inputs and then creating something, a new recipe out of lots of recipes, and then the innovation, yes, happening when you're making that new recipe. Okay, okay. So everyone's creative, everyone's innovative. There's different degrees of both. Why is creativity and innovation important? Is that the right question? Or I think that seems more interesting than the other question of why is identifying the difference between creativity and innovation important? Which one should we explore?
I'd like to throw in another question.
Oh yeah, okay, go for it.
Do we need both?
Oh, that's a good third question. I'll take that. Do we need both creativity and innovation?
Like, can you be innovative without creativity? Or can and I think it works both ways, right? Can innovation exist without creativity, and can creativity exist without innovation?
I'm gonna fall back here on someone else's definition, if that's okay. So some of our listeners might have heard of somebody called Sir Ken Robinson. He's done an extremely famous, one of the most watched TED Talks ever, and has written several books. Did write several books, unfortunately. He died last year, which is very sad. But his in one of his books called Out of Our Minds, he explores the whole subject of creativity. Really great book, highly recommended. But he actually talks about imagination, creativity, and innovation, and likes to define each of those 3 things. And I kind of hopefully getting to the answer to your question, but starting with his definition. So he talks about imagination as the source of creativity, but imagination and creativity aren't the same thing. So imagination is the ability to bring to mind things that are not present to our senses. Then creativity is a step further from imagination. He says imagination can be an entirely private process of internal consciousness. Creativity involves putting your imagination to work. And in a sense, and I quite like this super kind of succinct definition, in a sense, creativity is applied imagination. Then he says innovation is the process of putting new ideas into practice. Innovation is applied creativity. So he's kind of going imagination, then creativity, then innovation. And actually, reading this definition here, the word process, innovation is the process of putting new ideas into practice. By definition, innovation is always about introducing something new or improved, or both. And it's usually assumed to be a positive thing. So going back to your question about can one exist without the other in either direction? maybe the reason I fell back on this is because, or use this, maybe fall back is the wrong word, but I'm using these great definitions because he talks about it as like layer by layer. So you can be imaginative without being creative because you can daydream and do nothing with what passes through your imagination. You can let it go. If you do something with it and make something, you can be creative.
But you needed the imagination to be creative.
Yeah, and he says that you need the creativity in order to be innovative. Yeah.
So I guess the answer to that question is you can be creative and not innovative, but you can't be innovative without creativity.
Not according to his definition. And kind of maybe this is it's interesting that we can, if we take that logic, because it is a logical kind of progression, to help ourselves describe and help ourselves describe and think about creativity and innovation. I quite like that, using logic to do that thing.
I really like that framework of imagination leads to creativity, creativity leads to innovation. And now it has me rethinking, early in the podcast, I was talking about the teacup and how it's creative, but it's not an innovation though, because it's a pretty cup to drink out of, but it hasn't really improved or introduced something new to tea drinking. Whereas, these two objects are sitting side by side on my desk, and the other object is the iPhone, right? So there's a lot of creativity that went into creating the iPhone. Like, I know it's hard for us to remember this because it's such an integral part of our lives today, but the iPhone did not exist at one point, and someone had to envision this idea of something so small and powerful that can travel around with us everywhere we went and give us access to basically the entire world. So that was an imagination. And then they decided to do something with it. I'm thinking they did some sketches and really tried to picture what it looks like. And they may have even created a prototype of it. But it wasn't until these phones ended up in people's hands that it really became an innovation. Because when it started to change how we work and live and communicate and, basically change the way we lived, that was the innovative part. Everything else was imagination and creativity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like that. That's a helpful kind of mental model to think about. And that iPhone thing of, and you can watch this on YouTube, where Steve Jobs is introducing the very first iPhone. And in typical Steve Jobs style, he's got the audience in the palm of his hands, and he's about to introduce this new device that people have got a clue about, aren't sure what it is. And he talks about it's a computer. I think he says it's a mobile phone. We've got a mobile phone, we've got a computer, we've got an MP3 player, and he says it a few times: mobile phone, computer, and eventually the audience are going, I think he's talking about the same thing. And then he gets it, and he said, this is it. So, and the audience kind of go wild. It's that I like that as an example of often, maybe this is where in the kind of there's some sort of transition zone, if you like, between creativity and innovation. And sometimes, and I talk to people about this, sometimes taking three existing ideas, one or more existing ideas, and combining them into something new, that can be also a helpful definition of innovation. Because let's say you've created three ideas and you combine them into one useful thing. That's the applied imagination, applied creativity that becomes innovative, and that's the iPhone is a great example of that. Also, once the iPhone was out there, maybe it was an enabler. That this is taking us somewhere, but maybe deeper or off on a tangent. But it was an enabler of, you could say, kind of societal creativity and innovation, because as soon as you have this device in your hand and people start imagining what else it could do, then that results in creativity, results in innovation, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think innovation and creativity are one of those things. It's like the gift that keeps giving. Like once there's one thing, I mean, you think about it, right? Like we have a whole industry of apps now. Like app developers did not exist at one point, and now that's somebody's career. So I think innovations also bring to life other innovations, and those things bring to life other innovations. So I don't think that innovations exist kind of in a vacuum. So every time we bring to life something that is a creative act, which now we're calling an innovation, it enables other things to come into existence as well.
Nice.
I also want to go back to the point that you said about, I think we often think innovation is only brand new things. And that's a big fallacy. And it's something I hear a lot, because I think we forget that innovation can be an improvement or transformation of something. And like you said, it can also be the bringing together of things that already exist to create something new or improve something that exists that works better. Yeah,
nice. And that kind of, as you were talking there, I went back to creativity and innovation. It's starting to crystallize even better in my mind now. Actually, if you think about, let's say your cooking example, and everyone might recognize this. You follow a recipe to make a meal. You've just created something that didn't exist before. You've put together the ingredients, you create it. It doesn't matter. I mean, even if you've ever worked in a fast food restaurant, McDonald's, you work in McDonald's and you are creating, Happy Meals. They might be identical time after time, but you're still creating them. I guess that if you work in McDonald's making Happy Meals, you're not actually supposed to innovate in the moment, but McDonald's head office will be innovating all the time to bring into the world new, types of burger. I'm not a McDonald's fan, by the way, and they don't sponsor this podcast. I guess it shows how pervasive they are. I thought of that. So yeah, but again, if you are an artist and you're creating a painting, and maybe you're in Picasso again, and I use this as a segue into how we might get better at creating and innovating. But Picasso, he kind of went through phases of doing different styles of painting and sculpture throughout his career, and he was prolifically creative. And in one of his periods, the Blue Period, for example, he would have been creating a certain type of picture painting, and then moving into, I'm not an art historian, so his next phase he would have been taking an innovative step perhaps into expressing himself differently, creatively. I'll ask you this question. Picasso comes to mind when I ask this question and reply to it. How? So we've talked about the definitions, and we've talked about I think we're starting to get to why it's important. How do we get more creative and innovative? What are some things that people or organizations can do?
How do we become more creative and innovative? So I think the starting point is remembering that we are. And when I talk to people about this, what I often tell them is like, remember what it was like to be a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, or if you have children or friends of yours have children, like observe them, because they are super creative And what I appreciate about that age group also is that they don't really care if you appreciate their creativity or not.
Very nice. You're right. They do not. They do not give two hoots.
They do not. I have a couple of drawings that, friends of the children of some of my friends have created these drawings of me. And I just, and I keep them, even though I look at them and I'm like, wow. But I keep them because, when they gave them to me, they were so full of pride. Like, I drew this portrait of you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think somewhere along the way, so we went from being so creative and so confident in our creativity to, like, along the way, that's kind of been chipped away. And this is where I'm going to go back to someone we talk about a lot in our conversations, Pete, Sir Ken Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how our schooling system like beats the creativity out of us. I'm paraphrasing here. But I do think, and I don't think it's just the school system. I think it's just in life. We start out really being super creative beings, and then it slowly gets chipped away, and then we become adults that forget that we are creative beings. So I think the first place to start is remembering that we're creative. Yeah, and that can be something simple as, start doodling.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be good at it, but just start doing it. Even if it's you get a coloring book and start, coloring or doodling. I think those activities help us to kind of come back to that, get on the floor and play with some Legos.
Yeah.
Because I think that starts to activate that part of our brain that starts to remember that, hey.
That we were all four once, and kind of reconnecting with that I guess childlike playfulness and that maybe childlike innocence, naivety, where we weren't even aware that things could be good or bad, or could be judged in that way, either by ourselves or other people. That's doing something, stepping out of your routine and doing something that reconnects you. That I think that's a great starting point. And we'll maybe jump around here and how we do it, but the reason I mentioned Picasso and kind of he comes to mind again. I like to help people think about creativity and process together, and often people's minds don't put those two words together. But if we think about Picasso, even Picasso had a process. The reason he was so prolific is because he had a process. I'm sure it evolved over time, but he had a creative process. I like photography. One of my favorite photographers is Ansel Adams. You read anything about him, and look at his just amazing photographs, and each of those is a result of a meticulous process, a step-by-step thing. So I like to remind people that creative, it's not just people don't just automatically, like Picasso, any of his works of art that you see are the result of not numerous steps in a process. This podcast is called the Design Thinkers Podcast. Design thinking is part of design thinking is having a process that we follow from beginning to end, and actually a design thinking process lends itself really well to being creative and innovative, because it helps us overcome some of these kind of barriers that we've built up in ourselves to not be creative. For example, prototyping and testing. I read a good quote. Hopefully, I've not said it in another podcast. I think I have. It's the old one about Ed Catmull and Pixar movies. We sit down in the cinema or at home and see our Pixar movies, and it's a work of art and highly entertaining. We forget that behind that there's 10 years of iteration, and the first 9 years are probably not very good. It's only the last year that it actually comes together. So, but each, that each of cycle through that process, that design process in our case is a creative act that results in innovation. So we've got, remember, you were 4 once. We've got a process to follow and trusting in a process to be creative and innovative. How else might we get better at being those 2 things, Dani?
Another thing I think that's a good practice to get into is to write down your ideas.
Okay.
I think we're also very good at killing our ideas before they have any chance to live at all. And I think most of us have had this experience where your mind is kind of working side by side, where as soon as an idea comes up, the other part of your brain's just shutting it down and like the idea has emerged and you've already come up with 200 reasons why the idea won't work. So I would often encourage people, write your ideas down, even if nothing comes of it, just capture it and leave it there. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, where I write down ideas that I have, and I have a little notebook of ideas. And sometimes I go back and I really think, man, that was really stupid. And that's okay. But the purpose is to give the idea some time to evolve. So write it down.
Nice. And that makes, it's probably a branch of the same thing to do, but it's around ideas and generating and capturing lots of ideas, even though they initially might not seem like good ideas, is a good, I guess, creative habit to get into, isn't it? To I guess pay attention to how your mind responds to your mind coming up with ideas. I will look this up and we'll talk about it maybe in a future podcast, but there was a specific phrase that describes the condition, and maybe, I don't know whether you experience this, I do, where your imagination can come up with almost imagination can see the perfect vision of something. And by seeing that inside your mind, it almost holds you back from taking the next step into creativity, because the other part of your mind holds you back from trying to put it into reality, because it's kind of judging and thinking, well, it's never going to be as good as you imagine it to be in real life, so just don't do anything. And I think I'm describing that because to be creative and therefore in turn innovative, we need to learn to manage that kind of thought process and have that amazing vision in your mind and start with something rather than setting yourself ridiculously high standards and expectations, expecting the perfect idea to emerge spontaneously all at once.
Yeah, so that's something so when I was in design school, that's something you'd learn, right? Because you sketch and you sketch and you sketch and you sketch, and you're constantly taught, like, whatever the first thing you create is likely going to be crap. But until you create the first thing, until you create the first draft, you can't create the second draft or the third draft or the final. So every final product, and this goes back to your Pixar example, every final product starts with a first draft. And until you get the first draft down, it won't go anywhere. Yeah. So I think that's where, there is, creativity has an element of an act of courage. Like, we have to have the courage to take what's in our heads and put it on paper, whether that's physical paper or an electronic form, but we have to take it we have to have the courage to take what's in our brains and put it in something in the external world to give it a chance to evolve.
Nice. Those are inspiring words. Okay, so we've got have the courage or be courageous to start with something. We've got going back to the big. We've got remember what it's like to be a 4-year-old, or even embrace your inner 4-year-old. Have a process and trust it. Capture lots, generate and capture lots of ideas. I like you've got some great practical tips this week, Danny. So I like that. Have a notebook to capture ideas, and lots of creative people do that. Writers, poets, musicians, etc. But we can all do that, can't we? We can all, if we're writing, we can carry around a notebook and capture and build up. What I particularly like is your discipline, and this is the next thing I think is being the creativity and innovation does involve a bit of discipline, and your discipline of going back to the ideas that you've had before and using those as a source for further creativity and innovation. I like that a lot.
I think that's another myth I just want to point out here. I think we have this mental model of, creativity as being this like free flowing haphazard, or that classic, we have it like those bright ideas that all of a sudden pop in and like, ta-da. And that's such a fallacy, right? Because to get to those brilliant ideas, it takes discipline, it takes practice, it takes iterations. It's not this spontaneous thing that, happens. And I think most of us, if you didn't, if you weren't trained in like an art, whether it was music or drawing or whatever, I think we missed out on learning that there is a process to creativity and design, and it takes discipline.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think that is, again, back to Sir Ken Robinson and back into education. We specialize in subjects, or subjects are really quite specialized, and they almost re-emerge potentially as organizational silos or vertical things later in life, but our subjects are isolated in silos. So we don't, unless you study one or two creative subjects at school, then you don't learn that is a process thing, and that can be beneficial to all sorts of different subjects and areas of life. So what else? Was there anything else? Anything really important?
I've got one more, and I think this one is important. And we cannot be creative without a willingness to be vulnerable. And I did not learn this. I was quite resistant to learning this. So a quick story. For years and years, people were recommending Brene Brown's work to me, and she is like the expert on vulnerability. And I never thought that was a thing for me. And then I came across her book, The Gift of Imperfection. And I, moment of confession, I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Me too. Maybe there's a different name for the podcast.
And in reading that book, what I realized is that actually perfectionism is a form of unwillingness to be vulnerable. Because if you are a perfectionist, it's never good enough. And if you work in the design or, in that space, what it really means is you are not willing to put your work out there until you believe it's perfect. And as a design thinker, what you have to be willing to do is put something out there, know it's not perfect, and then be able to be open to feedback you get about it and then iterate it. But again, until you put it out there, nothing will happen. So I think that vulnerability thing is really important when it comes to innovation and creativity, because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, those brilliant ideas will never evolve into anything.
Nice. I like that. And it reminds me of the neuroscience research that shows that we cannot be in fear and creativity at the same time. It's one or the other. They kind of work like a switch. Maybe the last question on how is, what about innovation? Is there, we kind of, I feel like we've talked about creativity, and if we then take Sir Ken Robinson's definition, say innovation is applied creativity, I think everything we've talked about applies to innovation as well. Is there anything extra that we would want to be thinking about doing to make innovation happen?
In my view, I think because innovation is creativity applied creativity, I think when we come to innovation, vulnerability becomes much bigger, because in the application process, that's when everything can go wrong.
Yeah.
And I think this is
even more visibly wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're starting from a place where you aren't willing to go, I think this is a great idea, I'm going to put it out there and it could all go okay, and I'll be okay if it does. And I think this is why a lot of organizations that say they want to be innovative never quite get there, because there is that fear element and a lack of willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, that the kind of the perceived risk of failure, and I'm stressing the perceived risk of failure, and the threat that perceived risk appears to create to people's, I guess, ultimately personal kind of psyche, I suppose. Security. So again, coming back to the fear thing, that outweighs the desire to innovate, to be innovative. Nice.
So we've talked about what innovation is, what creativity is, and I think where we landed with that was that imagination leads to creativity, creativity leads to innovation. So you can have creativity without innovation, but you can't have innovation without creativity. Then we talked a little bit about, how can we be more creative or innovative? And in that, we talked about the need for vulnerability, tapping into our inner 4-year-olds, sketching and keeping a log of ideas. Have I missed anything in there?
Talks about being courageous, having a process and trusting the process. I guess maybe just having in the back of your mind the knowledge that anything innovative you experience started off as a different idea, more than likely, and has gone through a long journey to become the thing that you are experiencing as innovation.
So what does this all mean, Pete?
What does it all mean? Well, I think it means that we as individuals, first of all, should pay attention to our imagination. We should have the courage to create and then find a way to turn that creativity into innovation. And I think that, starting as individuals and then rapidly getting together with other people to create and innovate together. I think that for me, that's what I'm starting to get from this, what it means to me. How about you?
I think what it means for me is the interconnectivity of imagination, creativity, and innovation, and how that interplay and how they build on each other. And I think also the thing that's brought to surface in this conversation for me is the idea that there is a disciplined process to this. So I think, and I know I've said this a couple of times already, but I think there is this myth that creativity is this haphazard thing that just, happens. But it's a disciplined practice that has to happen over time.
Nice, Dani. Okay. So I think we've been on an interesting journey, an interesting conversation this week. What's one thing you're going to take away from this week's podcast?
I want to go back and revisit Sir Ken Robinson's work, and because I want to understand, am I doing things that's continuing to like suppress other people's creativity?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I was going to talk about. I'm going to dig into Picasso and understand what his process or processes were, so I can kind of learn from a master. I think I will still do that, but maybe in turn that will help me understand how to do the same thing that you are taking away. The work that we do, I think we have an ultimate responsibility to enable and activate creativity and therefore innovation in people. So yeah, that's a good call out. What might we be doing unintentionally that's not helping? Thank you for giving me my takeaway right at the end. It's like a little, it's the biscuit that went with my coffee at the end of the meal. Just finishing things off perfectly.
Awesome. I love that. Now I want a biscuit.
Me too. Dani, great chat. I love this week's chat.
This was great. I think that does it for our episode this week. Tune in next week when Pete and I tackle another interesting topic in design. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.